Ma'am, cleaning crews use the freight elevator. The main lobby is for tenants only. The sentence cracked through the marble lobby so sharply that conversations stopped mid-breath. Richard Hale stood beside the polished security desk with one hand resting on his belt, eyes narrowed at the black woman holding a simple canvas tote and wearing dark jeans, white sneakers, and a charcoal raincoat still dotted with water from the Seattle drizzle outside. Naomi Brooks looked up slowly at the 40-foot glass ceiling of Brooks Meridian Tower, the building her company had spent 6 years designing, financing, and raising into the skyline, and for one quiet second, she said nothing at all. Around her, the lobby glowed with soft gold lighting reflecting against black marble floors so polished they mirrored the movement of hurried executives crossing toward the elevators. The scent of roasted coffee drifted from the cafe tucked near the west wall, while instrumental jazz floated quietly through hidden speakers overhead. Everything about the tower whispered wealth, precision, control. And yet in the center of it stood Naomi, being treated like she had wandered into a place she didn't deserve to touch. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled, but not enough to hide the contempt inside it. You people always try to sneak through the front during the morning rush. Naomi's eyes shifted toward him. Calm, unblinking. The kind of calm that made nervous people speak louder. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Brooks. She adjusted the strap on her tote bag and glanced toward the security cameras mounted above the revolving doors. Richard mistook the look for uncertainty and smirked. Badge, he demanded. Naomi reached into her coat pocket slowly and removed a slim black access card. Richard barely looked at it before laughing under his breath. Cute, he muttered. Probably borrowed from somebody upstairs. Behind the front desk, Megan Price, a blonde receptionist with a bright blue blazer and an even brighter smile for everyone except Naomi, leaned sideways toward another employee and whispered something that drew a quiet laugh. Naomi heard it anyway. She doesn't even look like she works in the building. The words landed with the same stale familiarity they always carried. Naomi had heard versions of them since she was 19 years old, carrying cleaning supplies beside her mother through luxury office buildings after midnight shifts. Back then, people never looked directly at them. They looked through them, as if uniforms erased humanity. Richard extended his hand toward her tote. Open the bag. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Excuse me. Building policy, he replied instantly. Random security screening. The lie came too fast, too rehearsed. A man in an expensive navy suit slowed near the elevators, pretending to check his phone while listening. 2 women near the cafe stopped speaking altogether. The air in the lobby no longer felt calm. It felt charged. Naomi looked directly at Richard Hale for the first time since he spoke. You're asking to search my property because you think I'm a cleaner? Richard shrugged. If the shoe fits. Somewhere behind the desk, Megan laughed again. Naomi exhaled once, slow and controlled, then reached into her pocket and unlocked her phone. Richard immediately stiffened. No recording allowed in the lobby. Naomi ignored him completely and lifted the phone to her ear. Claire, she said evenly as the line connected. I'm in the main lobby now, and I think we finally found the problem. Richard Hale folded his arms across his chest the moment Naomi lowered the phone from her ear. Who is Claire? He asked with a grin that barely concealed irritation. Your lawyer? Naomi slipped the phone calmly back into her coat pocket. Something like that. The answer only annoyed him more. Around the lobby, people had started slowing down instead of walking through. Executives pretending to wait for elevators lingered near the polished chrome columns. A delivery driver near the entrance stood frozen beside a rolling cart stacked with packages. Even the barista inside the cafe had stopped wiping the counter. Everyone could feel it now. Something was unfolding in real time. Richard glanced toward the security monitor wall behind the desk, then back at Naomi, as if deciding how aggressive he wanted to become. You know what your problem is? He asked. Naomi said nothing. You walk in here acting comfortable where you should be grateful. Megan let out another soft laugh from behind the desk, but this time it sounded nervous instead of amused. Naomi looked toward the massive bronze letters mounted across the far marble wall. Brooks Meridian International. Her name. Her company. Her mother's last name carried 40 feet high inside a tower that cost $1.4 billion to build. And yet somehow the man standing in front of her still saw a black woman in plain clothes and decided she belonged near a mop bucket instead of the boardroom upstairs. Naomi had learned years ago that some people never saw ownership unless it arrived wearing a gray suit and a white face. Richard stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Open the bag or leave the building." Naomi slowly turned back toward him. "You think I came here to steal something? I think people like you test boundaries until somebody stops you." There it was again. Not policy, not procedure. Belief. Pure and simple. A young man waiting near the elevators quietly pulled out his phone and angled it downward, pretending to text while recording. Naomi noticed, but did not react. She had spent too many years watching moments like this happen behind closed doors where nobody could prove anything later. Now the witnesses were building on their own. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and a young Latino woman stepped out carrying a tablet against her chest. She stopped the second she saw Naomi standing near the security desk. Her eyes widened instantly with recognition. Sofia Ramirez, 23 years old. Summer operations intern. Naomi remembered reading her file 3 weeks earlier because Sofia had written an internal proposal about improving tenant accessibility after hours. Smart, observant, fearless on paper, but now fear flickered openly across her face as she glanced between Naomi and Richard. "Sir," Sofia said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion." Richard did not even look at her. "Go upstairs, Sofia." "But I think she is." "I said go upstairs." The sharpness in his voice cut through the lobby. Sofia swallowed hard, but stayed where she was. Naomi watched her closely. It took courage to interrupt authority in a room full of people pretending not to see injustice happening 10 feet away from them. Megan rolled her eyes. Interns always want attention. Sofia ignored her and looked directly at Naomi again. Naomi gave the smallest nod imaginable. Calm. Steady. Permission. Sofia inhaled slowly. "I have seen her before," she said. "In executive orientation files." Richard finally turned toward her, expression darkening. "You are about to embarrass yourself over a cleaning contractor." Naomi almost smiled at that. Almost. Then her phone vibrated once inside her coat pocket. Claire was moving fast. The vibration from Naomi's phone seemed to ripple through the lobby harder than any raised voice could have. Richard noticed it too. His posture tightened immediately. People who abuse authority always recognize the moment control starts slipping away. Naomi removed the phone slowly and glanced at the screen. One message from Claire Bennett. Protocol 7 initialized. Internal audit access granted. Naomi locked the screen again without replying. Richard let out a dry laugh meant for the audience gathering around them. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked loudly. "Some intimidation tactic?" Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket. "No," she answered calmly. "Documentation." The word hung in the air heavier than anyone expected. Megan shifted behind the desk and looked toward Richard for reassurance, but his confidence had started cracking around the edges. Sofia still stood near the elevators clutching her tablet, so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. She knew exactly who Naomi Brooks was now, and judging by the growing silence across the lobby, other people were starting to suspect it too. Richard pointed toward the revolving doors at the front entrance. "You are done here. Either leave willingly, or I escort you out myself." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Escort me out of my own building?" Richard smirked instantly. "There it is. Delusions." A few uncomfortable laughs slipped from nearby employees, but nobody sounded convinced anymore. Naomi took one slow step toward the center of the lobby. Above her, sunlight pushed through 30-foot windows overlooking downtown Seattle, washing the marble floor in silver reflections. The tower stood exactly the way she had imagined it years ago while sketching concepts at a kitchen table beside her mother's night shift schedules. Every inch of this place had been built from sacrifices nobody in this lobby would ever see. Her mother cleaning office floors until 2 in the morning. Naomi studying contracts while half asleep at community college. Investors smiling at white founders, but asking Naomi whether she was experienced enough to manage large-scale development. She remembered every elevator she had been told not to use. Every room she had been mistaken for staff inside. And now here it was again. Same look, different building. Richard suddenly reached toward the black access card still in Naomi's hand. Give me that. Naomi pulled her hand back slightly. Why? Because it is clearly unauthorized. You checked. Richard hesitated for half a second too long. Naomi noticed. So did everyone else. A middle-aged man standing near the cafe muttered quietly to another tenant. He never scanned it. Megan jumped in quickly. Sir, we already know she does not belong here. Naomi looked directly at her. And how exactly do you know that? Megan opened her mouth, but no answer came. Because the truth sounded ugly when spoken out loud. Richard stepped forward again, voice sharpening. Enough. Hand over the card now. Naomi stared at him silently for a moment before extending the card toward him. Richard snatched it immediately like a man winning an argument. He held it up between two fingers and turned toward the security desk. Deactivate this badge, he ordered. Sophia's eyes widened instantly. Sir, wait. Richard ignored her. And call building operations. I want confirmation this woman is not on any executive clearance list. Megan turned toward the computer terminal behind the desk and began typing quickly. Naomi watched her without moving. Calm. Steady. Dangerous in a way the room still did not fully understand. Then the monitor screen suddenly froze. Megan frowned. Tried again. Nothing. A second later, every security tablet behind the desk flashed black at the exact same time. The lobby lights dimmed almost imperceptibly before returning. Richard turned sharply toward the monitors. What the hell was that? Naomi finally spoke again. That, she said quietly, was the building recognizing me before you did. For 3 full seconds the lobby stood completely still. Nobody moved toward the elevators. Nobody checked a phone. Even the soft jazz playing through the ceiling speakers suddenly felt distant under the weight of what Naomi had just said. Richard Hale stared at the dark security monitors behind the desk as confusion slowly replaced arrogance across his face. Get the system back online, he snapped at Megan. Her fingers flew across the keyboard again. Nothing happened. Every access panel remained frozen black except for one line of white text slowly appearing across the center monitor. Executive override authorized. Richard frowned hard at the screen. What is that supposed to mean? Naomi folded her hands calmly in front of her. It means somebody higher than you just entered the system. Megan swallowed visibly. The confidence she had been wearing all morning was collapsing fast now that technology itself seemed to disagree with her assumptions. Sophia stepped forward another inch, eyes fixed on the monitors. Sir, she said quietly, only executive ownership level accounts can trigger a building-wide override. Richard turned toward her instantly. Stop talking. But his voice lacked the certainty it carried earlier. Because now the lobby itself was betraying him. One by one, elevator screens throughout the building flickered with the same silver emblem. Brooks Meridian Executive Protocol active. Several tenants looked up at the displays at the exact same moment. Murmurs spread across the marble floor like a wave. A man near the cafe lowered his coffee slowly. Wait, he whispered, Brooks? Naomi watched the realization begin crawling through the room. Not all at once. Slowly, like sunrise moving across glass. Richard still refused to see it. Some people cling to power hardest when it is already gone. He stepped toward Naomi again and held up the black access card he had confiscated. You hacked the system somehow. Naomi almost looked disappointed hearing that. That is your explanation? It makes more sense than whatever game this is. Sophia looked at Richard in disbelief now. Sir, the override came directly from internal ownership servers. Megan stood up from her chair too quickly, panic slipping into her voice. Richard, maybe we should call operations upstairs. I am security chief, he barked. I do not need permission to remove somebody from the lobby. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Even the owner? Richard froze for half a heartbeat. There it was. The word nobody wanted to say first. Owner. The silence after it felt enormous. Richard laughed suddenly, but it sounded forced now. Thin. Hollow. You expect people to believe you own this tower? Naomi looked around slowly at the building rising around them. The imported marble from Italy. The floating steel staircase near the west atrium. The rainwater glass installation suspended over the reception area. She knew every detail because she had approved every detail. I know exactly what people believe, she answered quietly. The revolving doors opened behind her as 2 uniformed building operations managers hurried inside carrying tablets. Their pace slowed instantly the moment they saw Naomi standing near the desk. One of them, a gray-haired man named Daniel Chie, stopped so suddenly he nearly dropped his device. Ms. Brooks. The entire lobby shifted. Physically shifted. People straightened. Phones lowered. Eyes widened. Megan's face lost all color. Sophia closed her eyes briefly like she had finally been allowed to breathe again. Richard turned slowly toward Daniel. You know her? Daniel looked stunned by the question itself. Know her, he repeated. She built this company. Richard's grip tightened around the access card. Naomi stepped toward him carefully, her sneakers barely making sound against the marble floor. You called me a cleaner, she said softly. And somehow that was supposed to make me smaller. Richard opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Around them, the lobby no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like judgment arriving in real time. Richard Hale looked like a man trying to wake himself from a nightmare that kept getting louder instead of fading away. His eyes bounced between Naomi Brooks, the frozen security monitors, and Daniel Chie standing rigid near the elevators. The lobby no longer belonged to him. That truth was becoming visible on every face in the room. Megan slowly stepped backward from the desk as though distance might separate her from what had just happened. Sophia remained near the elevator bank, clutching her tablet against her chest, still stunned, but no longer afraid. Naomi stood in the center of it all with the same controlled calm she had carried from the moment she walked through the revolving doors. That calm unsettled people more than anger ever could. Richard finally forced a laugh that sounded dry and unstable. If you were really the owner, he said, you would have announced it immediately. Naomi looked at him quietly for a moment before answering. No, I wanted to see how your people treated someone they thought had no power. The words landed harder than shouting. Several employees near the cafe lowered their eyes instantly, because everybody understood what she meant. This was never about a misunderstanding. It was about permission. Permission to disrespect someone once they decided she belonged beneath them. Daniel Chie took a cautious step forward. Ms. Brooks, he said carefully, Claire Bennett is requesting a secure call with building leadership immediately. Naomi nodded once. Patch her through the lobby system. Richard's head snapped toward him. You cannot do that without my authorization. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. Your authorization? The words almost sounded sad. Before Richard could answer, the speakers hidden throughout the marble lobby crackled softly overhead. Then Claire Bennett's voice filled the space, sharp and composed. Good morning, Brooks Meridian staff. Effective immediately, Executive Protocol 7 is active. All security authority is temporarily suspended pending internal review. The silence afterward was suffocating. Richard's face drained of color. Megan whispered, Oh my God. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as Claire continued speaking overhead. Any employee involved in discriminatory enforcement practices will remain on restricted access status until audit completion. Naomi had heard language like that before. Corporate wording. Clean. Professional. But behind every polished sentence lived real humiliation. Real memories. She suddenly remembered standing beside her mother at 13 years old inside an office tower in Chicago nearly 20 years earlier. Her mother wore a Navy janitor uniform with a plastic badge clipped near her shoulder. Naomi had been helping carry extra paper towels because her mother's shift supervisor refused to approve overtime help. A white executive exiting the elevator glanced at them once and immediately handed Naomi an empty coffee cup without saying a word, as though she belonged there to clean up after him automatically. Naomi remembered the heat that climbed into her chest that night. Not embarrassment. Clarity. She remembered her mother quietly placing the cup back into the man's hand and saying, My daughter is not here to carry what you refuse to see. That sentence had followed Naomi her entire life. And now here she stood decades later inside a billion-dollar tower carrying her own name while another man looked directly at her and still saw somebody meant for service entrances and freight elevators. Richard took a sudden step toward her again. Desperation replacing authority now. This is insane, he muttered. You are destroying my career over one misunderstanding. Naomi looked directly into his eyes for the first time since Claire's announcement. No, she said quietly. You built this moment yourself. The revolving doors opened once more as two additional corporate officers entered the lobby carrying audit folders and electronic tablets. They walked straight past Richard without acknowledging him and stopped. Beside Naomi instead. The message was unmistakable. Power had already changed sides. Richard just had not accepted it yet. The energy inside the lobby had completely changed now. 15 minutes earlier, Richard Hale controlled the room with a security badge and a loud voice. Now he stood near the front desk looking smaller with every passing second, while corporate officers quietly positioned themselves around Naomi Brooks, like gravity returning to its natural center. The rain outside continued sliding down the massive glass windows overlooking downtown Seattle, but inside the tower the atmosphere felt electric. Phones remained raised. Employees whispered carefully behind their hands. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Naomi accepted a tablet from one of the corporate officers and calmly reviewed the information appearing across the screen. Her expression barely changed, but Daniel Cho noticed the tightening around her eyes. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Naomi looked up slowly. "Complaints." Richard immediately stiffened. Claire Bennett's voice returned through the overhead speakers. Audit Review has recovered 11 prior incident reports connected to discriminatory lobby enforcement practices over the last 14 months. 6 involved Black tenants or contractors. 3 involved Latino vendors. 2 were marked resolved without investigation. The words echoed through the marble lobby like a verdict already decided. Megan covered her mouth with one hand. Sophia looked physically ill hearing it confirmed out loud. Richard shook his head instantly. "That is not true." Claire continued anyway. All 11 complaints were routed directly through Chief Hale's office and closed internally without escalation. Naomi lowered the tablet slowly. "You buried them." Richard's face tightened with panic. "I followed procedure." Naomi stared at him. "No. You protected a pattern." The difference mattered. Everyone in the lobby understood that now. A middle-aged tenant near the elevators quietly muttered, "I knew something felt wrong in this building." Another employee lowered her eyes toward the floor, as if remembering moments she stayed silent too long. Richard suddenly pointed toward Naomi in frustration. "You walked in here dressed like maintenance staff. What did you expect people to think?" The sentence hit the room harder than he intended. Not because it helped him, because it exposed him completely. Naomi stepped toward him slowly across the polished marble floor. "There it is," she said softly. "The real policy." Richard opened his mouth again, but Naomi did not let him interrupt this time. "You decided a Black woman carrying a canvas bag could not possibly belong in a tower this expensive unless she was there to clean it." Her voice never rose. "That made it worse. You never checked my access level. You never scanned my badge. You saw what you wanted to see and treated that assumption like authority." Nobody spoke. Even the cafe staff had stopped moving completely now. Naomi looked around the lobby at the watching faces. "This building was designed by people your system would have stopped at the front door." Her words landed like stones dropped into still water. Richard tried one last time to regain control. "I was protecting the property." Naomi looked directly at the silver company logo towering across the marble wall behind him. "From me." Richard had no answer for that. Claire's voice returned overhead one final time. "Executive recommendation has been approved. Effective immediately, Richard Hale is removed from active duty pending permanent replacement review." A sharp electronic buzz suddenly echoed from Richard's security badge clipped near his belt. The small access light switched from green to solid red. Gasps spread quietly across the lobby. The system had locked him out in real time. Richard stared down at the badge like it had betrayed him personally. Naomi watched him carefully. Not angry, not triumphant, just certain. "You mistook silence for weakness," she said. "That was your last mistake." Richard slowly removed the useless badge from his belt, but before he could speak again, another elevator opened near the executive wing. 2 senior board members stepped into the lobby alongside Claire Bennett herself. And the moment Claire walked directly past Richard without acknowledging him even once. Everyone understood the truth completely. The tower had already moved on without him. Claire Bennett crossed the lobby with the kind of calm precision that only comes from people who already know the outcome. Her charcoal suit was still damp from the Seattle rain outside, but her attention never left Naomi Brooks. The moment she reached her side, she handed Naomi a thin digital folder and spoke quietly enough that only the nearest employees could hear. "Board approval is complete." Naomi nodded once. Around them, the marble lobby no longer felt like a corporate entrance. It felt like history being rewritten in public. Richard Hale remained frozen near the security desk, holding the dead access badge in his hand, like he still expected it to turn green again. Megan stood beside him, completely silent now, her earlier confidence erased by the reality settling over the room. Sofia Ramirez watched everything unfold with wide eyes, realizing she was witnessing the exact kind of moment companies later pretend happened because of values instead of courage. Naomi opened the digital folder slowly. Every complaint Richard buried sat there in clean black text. Dates, names, incident summaries. One tenant stopped for repeated badge checks every morning for 3 months despite executive clearance. A black architect mistaken for catering staff during a board reception. A Latino vendor escorted to the freight entrance while white contractors used the main lobby freely. Naomi read each line carefully without changing expression, but Claire noticed the sadness behind her eyes. You already knew, Claire said softly. Naomi closed the folder halfway. I suspected. She looked around the towering glass lobby again. I did not realize how comfortable they had become doing it. Richard finally stepped forward one last time. Pride and panic battled visibly across his face now. You are making me the villain because I enforce standards. Naomi turned toward him slowly. No, she replied. I am holding you accountable because your standards change depending on who walked through the door. The words landed with surgical precision. Several employees lowered their eyes immediately. Others stared directly at Richard now, seeing him differently for the first time. Naomi took a slow breath before speaking again. You never stopped me because of a bag, or a badge, or policy. Her voice remained low and steady. You stopped me because in your mind, somebody who looked like me could not possibly own something like this. Richard shook his head weakly. That is not true. Naomi stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. Then why did you never scan my card? Silence. Heavy and immediate. Why did you call me cleaning staff before asking my name? Richard looked away. Naomi continued anyway. Why did you assume I belong near service elevators instead of executive offices? Every question tightened the room further. Nobody interrupted because nobody could answer for him. Naomi glanced toward the giant company logo mounted across the marble wall behind the security desk. Brooks Meridian International. Silver letters, nearly 10 feet tall. Her mother cried the day they installed that sign. Naomi remembered standing beside her in this exact lobby after construction finished. Her mother had touched the wall softly and whispered, "They made us enter buildings through the back for years. Now your name is on the front." Naomi carried those words everywhere. She looked back at Richard. You called me a cleaner in the tower my family sacrificed everything to build. Her voice sharpened for the first time all morning. Not loud, just undeniable. The insult was never the uniform. The insult was believing service makes someone less human. The silence afterward felt enormous. Even the rain outside seemed quieter now. Claire stepped beside Naomi and spoke clearly enough for the entire lobby to hear. Effective immediately, Brooks Meridian Security will undergo executive restructuring. Richard's face tightened instantly. Naomi looked directly at him one final time. You did not fail because you questioned me, she said. You failed because you believed dignity had a dress code. The lobby remained silent long after Naomi Brooks finished speaking. Nobody rushed for the elevators anymore. Morning schedules had stopped matching. The entire building seemed suspended inside one moment of uncomfortable truth. Richard Hale stood near the security desk with his useless badge hanging loosely from his fingers while the giant silver company logo reflected behind him like judgment carved into metal. Claire Bennett turned toward the corporate officers beside her and nodded once. That was all it took. One officer stepped forward holding a digital tablet, while another approached the security terminal Richard had controlled for years. Transfer all active security authority to interim command, Claire ordered calmly. Effective immediately. The terminal chimed softly. New credentials loaded onto the screen. Richard's name disappeared from the system in real time. Employees near the front desk watched it happen with stunned expressions. Megan looked like she wanted the marble floor to open beneath her feet. Sofia Ramirez stood motionless beside the elevators, still clutching her tablet, but no longer trembling now. Something inside her had changed during the last 15 minutes. She had watched power expose itself and then collapse under its own arrogance. Richard stared at the screen in disbelief. You are replacing me right here? Claire looked directly at him. No, she answered evenly. Your actions replaced you. The sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Naomi remained quiet through most of it, observing the room with the same measured calm she carried from the beginning. She noticed the tenants watching from the cafe, the maintenance workers standing near the side corridor pretending not to listen while hearing every word. The younger employees who suddenly understood exactly why some people always seemed nervous entering buildings they absolutely belonged in. Naomi recognized that look because she wore it herself once. Years ago, before the money, before the boardrooms, before her name rose 40 feet high across the lobby wall. She remembered being 24 years old walking into a luxury property meeting in Boston carrying blueprints under her arm while a receptionist handed her an empty tray and asked her to refill coffee for investors. Naomi had corrected her politely. The woman never apologized. She simply looked embarrassed that somebody black, young, and female had entered the room as ownership instead of service. Those moments never really leave people. They stack quietly inside the bones until one day you build something large enough that the world has to look back at you directly. Claire handed Naomi another tablet. Final review recommendation is ready. Naomi read the summary briefly before speaking. Promote Deputy Supervisor Elena Park to Acting Security Chief pending board confirmation. A ripple moved through the lobby. Elena Park, a Korean-American supervisor known throughout the building for treating janitors, executives, delivery drivers, and tenants exactly the same way. Respectfully, one of the corporate officers smiled faintly. Excellent choice. Richard looked stunned hearing another name attached to his position so quickly. You already had somebody lined up? Naomi turned toward him calmly. Strong systems always prepare for leadership failure. The words landed with brutal precision. Elena arrived from the West Corridor seconds later after receiving the emergency call upstairs. She slowed immediately when she saw the entire executive team gathered in the lobby. Ms. Brooks. Naomi extended her hand toward her. Congratulations. The tower needs security leadership that understands the difference between protection and profiling. Elena accepted the handshake carefully, almost speechless. Around them, employees began quietly clapping. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to acknowledge what everybody had witnessed. Accountability. Richard looked around the room one final time, searching for support that no longer existed. Nobody stepped toward him now. Not Megan, not the officers, not even the tenants who once avoided eye contact around authority figures. The building had already chosen its direction. Naomi looked toward the towering glass entrance where rain continued falling over Seattle beyond the doors. This company was never built to keep certain people out, she said softly. It was built so people like us would finally have somewhere we never had to ask permission to enter. The applause faded slowly, but the feeling inside the lobby did not. It stayed suspended in the air like the final note of a song nobody wanted to interrupt. Naomi Brooks stood near the center of the marble floor while employees, tenants, and executives looked at her differently now. Not because they had suddenly discovered her wealth, because they had witnessed her restraint. She had not shouted. She had not threatened anyone. She had simply stood still long enough for the truth to expose itself. Outside the glass walls of the tower, Seattle traffic crawled through the gray morning rain, while inside Brooks Meridian, something far more important had shifted. The culture of the building itself. Claire Bennett quietly coordinated final audit procedures with the corporate officers near the reception desk, while Elena Park began speaking calmly with the remaining security staff. The transition happened without chaos, without humiliation, just accountability moving through the system exactly the way it should have from the beginning. Richard Hale remained near the lobby entrance holding a cardboard envelope containing his personal items. Nobody escorted him out dramatically. Nobody needed to. The silence around him carried enough weight already. Megan stood off to the side speaking softly with human resources representatives, her earlier smirk replaced by the unmistakable expression of somebody replaying every word they wished they could take back. Sofia Ramirez remained near the elevators, still processing everything she had witnessed. Naomi noticed her standing there and motioned gently for her to come closer. Sofia hesitated before stepping forward. You spoke up, Naomi said quietly. Sofia looked embarrassed suddenly. I almost did not. Naomi nodded slowly. Most people almost do not. That answer stayed with Sofia longer than she expected. Naomi looked around the lobby once more. Maintenance workers had returned to polishing the floors near the west corridor. Baristas resumed making coffee behind the cafe counter. Elevators opened and closed again, carrying tenants toward offices high above the city skyline. Life inside the tower was restarting, but differently now. Naomi glanced toward a janitor quietly replacing a trash liner near the entrance. The man noticed her looking and straightened nervously. Naomi smiled warmly at him. "Good morning." The man looked surprised for half a second before smiling back. "Morning, Ms. Brooks." Richard noticed that exchange too. And maybe for the first time all morning, he finally understood what he failed to see. Naomi had never been ashamed of cleaners. Her mother had cleaned buildings most of her life. The insult was never the work itself. The insult was believing certain people only belonged near labor and never leadership. Naomi turned toward the crowd still lingering throughout the lobby. Some held phones lowered at their sides now. Others simply watched quietly, understanding they had witnessed something larger than a staffing change. Naomi took one slow breath before speaking one final time. "My mother used to enter buildings through freight doors because people thought service workers should stay invisible," she said softly. "She taught me something I never forgot. The person holding the mop deserves the same dignity as the person holding the lease." The room stayed silent. Every word landed exactly where it needed to. Naomi continued calmly. This tower was not built so powerful people could feel important. It was built so nobody would ever have to shrink themselves just to walk through the front door. Claire looked toward her with quiet pride. Sophia's eyes watered slightly hearing it. Even some of the tenants standing near the cafe lowered their heads thoughtfully. Naomi picked up her canvas tote from beside the security desk and glanced once more at the silver company logo stretching across the marble wall. Years earlier, people looked at her mother and saw somebody meant to clean buildings. Now her family name stood above one. Naomi turned toward the executive elevators at last. "I did not raise my voice today," she said as the elevator doors opened behind her. "I raised the standard."